What if I told you that somewhere deep in a Tanzanian forest in 1974, a war broke out? Not between nations, not between armies, but between two groups of chimpanzees. And not a chaotic brawl, a real, organized, 4-year war with territory, strategy, betrayal, and a complete wipeout of one side. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at the most unsettling mirror nature has ever held up to humanity, the chimpanzee. Let's start with the basics, because the numbers alone should make you stop and think. Humans share 98.8% of their DNA with chimpanzees. That's closer than a lion is to a tiger. We diverged from a common ancestor somewhere between 7 and 9 million years ago, which sounds like a long time until you consider the age of the universe is 13.8 billion years. In evolutionary terms, chimps and humans are practically next door, neighbors, and as it turns out, we have more in common with them than just our hands, our faces, and our love of fruit. We also, apparently, share a talent for organized violence. So, the war. Let's talk about it. In the early 1970s, primatologist Jane Goodall was conducting research at Gombe National Park in Tanzania, studying a community of chimpanzees she had come to know well. She had spent years watching them, naming them, documenting their lives. She genuinely believed they were, quote, rather nicer than us. Then 1974 happened. By 1974, Goodall noticed the community beginning to splinter. Over a span of 8 months, a large party of chimpanzees separated themselves into the southern area and formed their own group, named the Kahama community. The separatists consisted of 6 adult males, 3 adult females, and their young. The original Kasakela community was left with 8 adult males, 12 adult females, and their young. What followed was not a skirmish. It was a systematic campaign of elimination. The first act of violence happened on January 7, 1974, when 6 adult males from the Kasakela community attacked one of the males from Kahama. He was gathering food from a tree at the time, and the 6 ambushers killed him. After that kill, they started celebrating by throwing branches and screaming victoriously. Sound familiar? It should. That is a victory display, recognizably, disturbingly human. During the 4-year conflict, all males of the Kahama community were killed, effectively disbanding the community. The victorious Kasakela then expanded into further territory, but were later repelled by 2 other chimpanzee communities. Goodall later wrote that for years, she struggled to come to terms with what she had seen. She had watched chimps she knew as individuals commit acts of coordinated brutality against former companions. As she put it, for so many years I had believed that. Chimpanzees, while showing uncanny similarity to humans in many ways, were, by and large, rather nicer than us. Suddenly I found that under certain circumstances they could be just as brutal. Here's where it gets even more interesting and more unsettling. Rather than impulsive scraps akin to a drunken brawl in a bar, the conflict was defined by political jostling for power and competition for resources, reminiscent of organized human warfare. A 2018 study at Duke University found that the schism was likely triggered by a power struggle between 3 high-ranking males. Power, ambition, rivalry, the same forces that have started human wars throughout history, just with less paperwork. But it doesn't stop at motivation, it extends all the way to tactics. Chimpanzees patrol the borders of their territory and can kill members of neighboring groups. Usually they are loud and outgoing and not very good at controlling their behavior. However, during patrols they move in single file, maintaining close proximity to each other and remain uncharacteristically silent. They sniff the ground for signs of rival chimps. They check for nests, food caches, fresh footprints. Perhaps the most remarkable thing is that they remain so silent. Chimpanzees find it difficult to control their spontaneous vocalizations, but during patrols, they refrain from calling entirely. Think about what that means. These animals are suppressing their own instincts in service of a collective military objective. That is discipline. That is tactical self-control. That is something we thought only humans were capable of. And they go even further than that. In 2023, researchers at the University of Cambridge published a study tracking 2 neighboring chimpanzee communities in Ivory Coast's Tai National Park. They followed the chimps for 8 to 12 hours a day over 3 years. What they found was extraordinary. Chimpanzees were twice as likely to climb hills near the contentious borders between their territories compared to areas within their own domain. While atop these border hills, rather than foraging or making noise, they displayed a quiet demeanor, listening intently for the distant sounds of rival groups. They were using the high ground as a listening post, taking the hills to gather intelligence before deciding whether to advance or retreat. There was a 60% likelihood of them venturing into enemy terrain if the rivals were detected at 3,000 meters away. The further the enemy, the safer the advance. A calculated risk assessment in the forest by apes. Lead researcher Sylvain Lemoine stated that tactical warfare like this is considered a driver of human evolution. He noted that their findings reveal sophisticated tactics in territorial behavior allowed by complex cognition such as anticipation, spatial memory, numerical assessment, and the ability to weigh the costs and benefits of conflict engagement. In other words, they're not just fighting, they're thinking about fighting. So what does all of this mean? Some scientists have argued this suggests that lethal, organized intergroup violence is not a product of modern civilization. It may be something far older, baked into the evolutionary lineage we share with our closest relatives. The chimpanzee model, as researchers now call it, is actively being used to explore how and why warfare emerged in early humans. Others push back, arguing that we should be careful about drawing straight lines between chimp behavior and human warfare. And that's fair. Human conflict involves political ideology, religion, economics, nationalism, layers of complexity that chimps don't have. But here's the thing, you don't need those layers to explain the basics. Territory, resources, power, rivals who used to be friends. The feeling that your group's survival depends on eliminating theirs. Those motivations are ancient, and they are shared. As researcher Lemoine put it, we only differ from our cousins in degree and not in nature. Jane Goodall once hoped chimps were nicer than us. The evidence suggests they're just the same as us, which is either comforting or deeply alarming, depending on how you look at it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is chimp warfare evidence that violence is wired into our DNA, or does it say something else entirely? And if you want more videos about the surprisingly dark corners of animal behavior, subscribe and stick around. We're just getting started.